Aunt Bev's return. The rain was drizzling lightly, and the soft patter on the roof added to the blanket of grief that surrounded the congregation. I sat between Mama and Papa. Mama leaned toward me for support, her lips quivering as she sniffled and moaned. Papa sat erect in a manly attempt to stave off tears. He blinked his eyes rapidly and dabbed his forehead with a blue and white striped handkerchief. Grandma sat in the pew in front of us and clutched Aunt Betty and Uncle Roy's hands. "My sweet baby gone," Grandma whispered, as tears trickled down her weather-beaten cheeks. "Hush, Mama, hush," murmured Aunt Betty, as she alternatively wiped Grandma's cheeks and patted her frail shoulders. Friends of the family were filing in somberly. I spotted more than one wet cheek. The majority of the family was already there. My 9 aunts, 4 uncles, and numerous cousins sat on the same side of the church in a sea of black and gray. We were mourning Aunt Bev, my favorite aunt. She was everyone's favorite. The large congregation testified to that. She had an easy, outgoing nature, and as Grandpa used to say, she had a permanent smile. Unfortunately for some people, she had the knack of giving jokes at the most inappropriate times. She was one of 6 persons who died suddenly in a bus crash. No one could come to terms with her sudden death. Uncle Pete was the nearest to the accident site, so he went to identify the body. According to him, it was crushed beyond recognition. However, he found the red hat that Aunt Bev was wearing at the time. It was dirty and mangled and hidden in the wreckage. Uncle Pete can't see well, though he wore bifocals. So we were a bit skeptical, mainly because we did not want Aunt Bev's death to be true. After 2 weeks and Aunt Bev did not show, we gave up hope. The dirty red hat seemed to mock us in its finality. There would be no more loud laughter and off-color jokes, no more cane row hairstyles for me. Nobody could comb my hair as well as Aunt Bev did. Since the body could not be found, Grandma decided on a memorial service where we would give our last remembrances and pay our respects to a truly loved person. An enlarged picture of Aunt Bev was placed at the front of the church, and the red hat, which was washed by a family member, was perched on a stick beside the picture. The participants in the service filed slowly and solemnly to the platform. The organist started playing Rock of Ages, loudly and off-key. Everyone stood, and we all sang. Aunt Mary stood directly behind me. It was obvious from her mumblings and her discordant tones that she could not read the hymnal's fine print. Mama once told me that Aunt Mary's voice was likened unto a cat on a tin roof. I can now understand why she said that. I winced as Aunt Mary attempted an even higher note. After the song, many prayers were said, and family and friends gave their remembrances. By this time, everyone in the church was weeping. Personally, I could not understand why it had to be Aunt Bev who died. Why not Aunt Cherry or Uncle Rupert? Not that I wanted any of them dead, but everyone knew that Aunt Cherry was the meanest person on the planet, and Uncle Rupert was living with Grandma so he could change her will. Why of Grandma's 14 children did Aunt Bev have to go first? Pastor Moncrief stood to deliver his sermon. He cleared his throat several times, jolting me from my reverie. Brothers and sisters, Bev was a good woman. A stalwart in this church, a mother to the poor and motherless, a willing helper, but the Lord saw it fit to send her to sleep until his judgment day. Brethren, he gives and he takes away. Mama's sniffling got even louder, and Papa was blinking his eyes more rapidly, wiping his face every other second. It was obvious that he did not want anyone to know that he was crying, but his bloodshot eyes testified that he was missing his sister dearly. Grandma held Uncle Roy's hand so tightly I saw him grimace. Aunt Betty was rocking to and fro and muttering, "Have mercy, Lord, have mercy." I felt hot and restless, and the gray suit that Mama insisted I wear was heavy and scratchy. I just wanted to go home and be alone with my memories of Aunt Bev. I was ready to doze off when the pastor started speaking about the uncertainty of life, repeating the same point over and over again. He bellowed and pointed, and strolled from one end of the platform to the other, chastising us for our sins. I looked toward the back of the church and marveled at the size of the congregation, and then I saw someone hurrying down the aisle in a black suit and a black veil. I thought to myself that it must be Aunt Ellen being fashionably late so that everyone could notice her latest dietary success. Then I saw the figure in black heading for our bench. She was walking fast and her strides were totally unlike Aunt Ellen's catwalk gliding. "Go on up more, Henry," the person said to my father. The voice sounded like Aunt Bev. My first reaction was one of shocked surprise. My throat felt dry. I could not see her face well under the veil, but it was definitely her in the flesh and smiling too. Then she raised the veil and smiled. Her teeth gleamed against the very heavy lipstick she wore. Grandma, who looked behind at that moment, fainted on Uncle Roy. Aunt Mary started screaming, and this drew everyone's attention toward our part of the church. The church froze as if a paralysis had suddenly descended, and then people started running and screaming. The place was in chaos. Uncle Pete, not being able to find his bifocals, bumped into every bench like a blind bat. On his way to the front door, he collided in Aunt Ellen, who was just preparing her grand entrance. I stood where I was, taking in the scene, not knowing what to do. Mama and Papa were nowhere to be seen in the sea of panicky people heading out in all directions, some choosing to exit by the less convenient but more speedy route of the church windows. The deacon, who had just collected the money, ran out with the collection plate while trying to keep the offering from falling out. Grandma, revived at that moment, looked at Aunt Bev and screamed, "Get behind me, Satan!" She again fainted on the seat that Uncle Roy had been occupying. Aunt Bev, pleasant as usual, stood, smiled, and took in the chaotic scene. Uncle Harry, who was passing slowly and painfully on his crutch, brushed against her. "Help!" he shouted, and threw down the crutch and hopped away on one foot. I was the only one standing with Aunt Bev in the church except for the pastor, who was running and shouting, "I rebuke you in the name of the Lord. Go back to where you are coming from." Even Grandma had gone already. "Watch ya!" exclaimed Aunt Bev. "Them not expect me to come at my own funeral." She laughed loudly, her ample breasts jiggling in her mirth. That's when I ran. Most people gathered at Grandma's house after the encounter with the ghost. That's where I found Mama, Papa, and most of the community assembled in the yard. When Mama saw me coming up the road, she ran to me and hugged me. "She box you? She touch you? Let me see your face, child." Mama looked me over, satisfied that the ghost had not touched me. She released me to go and tell my version of the event to my cousins. The talk in the yard was that Aunt Bev was coming to haunt the neighborhood. Stark terror was seen on everyone's face, including Pastor Moncrief's. He decided to continue his sermon right in Grandma's front yard. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 9 verses 5 and 6 that the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even the memory of them is forgotten. Their love, their hate, and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun. We all gathered around him, taking comfort in his words. Me never harm Bev in any way. Me was always kind to her. Me hope she no come on me yard come trouble me, Aunt Cherry said, to no one in particular. "You's a mean woman, Cherry," Mama whispered loudly. "She go haunt you, and the one Rupert for the rest of her life." Aunt Cherry whimpered in fear and slunk to the back of the sizable crowd. No one saw when the lone figure in black stood on the veranda until an ear-splitting scream was heard from Aunt Ellen, who pointed silently in that direction. The duppy, was the fearful whisper in the crowd. Everyone gathered in a tight circle closer to Pastor Moncrief. Go on, Pastor Moncrief. Go on, go rebuke her. Pastor Moncrief stood trembling, his mouth slightly agape. He cleared his throat as Aunt Bev stood on the veranda and laughed. Remember when me say people, this is just a trick the devil a play upon uno? I rebuketh, he stammered. Go and go get some garlic, Uncle Pete said to Aunt Betty. It's only vampire that work pon your fool, Aunt Betty whispered. Push Pastor Moncrief forward, it look like him needs some help for move. Shh, said the duppy. Everyone became silent. Only Aunt Mary's wheeze could be heard. Cherry, where you there? The ghost asked eerily. Aunt Cherry whimpered. Answer her, someone at the back of the crowd whispered. Yes, Aunt Cherry replied weakly. Is you take what the sheet said from Mama? Yes. I want you give it back. You mustn't steal from your own mother. Yes, Aunt Cherry said feverishly. And I will give back the knife and fork them when I borrow from Dorothy, and I will give Trevor lunch money for the rest of the year. Trevor was the only cousin who was going to college at the time. The whole family took turns to finance his education except Aunt Cherry. Rupert, the duppy said loudly. Yes, Uncle Rupert answered gruffly. His whole body seemed to tremble. He went to stand beside Aunt Cherry in the clearing where we all parted to give them way. Why you not stop try to change Mama Will? How much time now you try to change it? Only 2, stammered Uncle Rupert. Everyone gasped. Until now, it was only a rumor that he was trying to change the will. Who get what? Asked the duppy. Me give me and me pitney them all of the land and me left the house for the family. You are a thief, was the pronouncement from the veranda. Grandma started crying. She refused to hear anything bad about her children, and the revelation from Rupert was a shock. Aunt Betty hushed her as she leaned on an orange tree and wailed. I held her hand and she squeezed it tightly. The right will not there. Me woulda never leave the right will in the house, she sobbed. Rupert's expression was priceless. The ghost on the veranda laughed and removed the veil. Okay. Wanna stop the duppy argument. Me come off of the bus long before it crashed. I was spending some time with my friend Susan in Westmoreland. When me come back, me hear say uno have funeral for me. A loud sigh of relief went through the crowd, and we all took turns in hugging and touching her and checking that she was real. Aunt Cherry huffed and walked off. However, she did keep to her end of the bargain with the duppy. After the incident, she was remarkably different. She became kinder and more loving to her family members. As for Uncle Rupert, he moved out of Grandma's house and in with Aunt Betty. Allegedly, he had heard that Grandma had given Betty the right will to hide. It has been many years since the eventful day of Aunt Bev's return, and since then I have shared the story with my children countless times. Whenever I return to the place of my youth, I relive that day with great amusement with my favorite aunt who is still up to her usual antics. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, and subscribe. Check the description box for more stories and find my books on Amazon. See you in the next story.